this is now the final setup of this Arctic air cooler. So for the temperature, we set this one at 45 degrees Celsius for it to trigger the Arctic air cooling system. Okay, so this is just a quick update on the grid tie inverter by measuring the temperature at this time. So it's currently 12:30 at noon, and the current reading at our voltmeter is already at 3.17 amps with a voltage of 225, with the power produced at 670 watts. So I have here a temperature sensor probe which I purchased somewhere a long time ago, but I didn't manage to use it, so this is now the one. So outside temperature is already at 34 degrees, so this one is the probe here. So let us measure the temperature of this aluminum chassis by placing this probe inside here. Okay. So as you can see, it's now tracking the temperature of the grid tie inverter. So it is now at 42, 43, 44 degrees and still climbing up. So by the way, this is a relay temperature sensor, which you could put something as an output if a certain temperature is reached. So maybe we could place a fan here somewhere that would trigger if the temperature rises to a certain level. So still climbing at 51 degrees and up. So this one is the probe, just right underneath this chassis. So it is still climbing, and now it is at 54 degrees Celsius. Okay, so it's somewhere between 55 to 54 degrees and an average. So that is already quite a hot chassis here. Thus there is a need to do something to cool down this one. So you can already feel that it's really very hot at 55 degrees Celsius. It's now running at 665 watts with a current of 3.18 amps, and the chassis is at 55 degrees Celsius average temperature. So let's remove this one and see if the temperature drops. Okay. It's now at 51 and still dropping down, because it's now measuring the outside temperature. So this one is powered by a 12-volt supply, which is here. So this is just power supply of my dad modem here. 12-volt power supply. So it's now going down to 44 here. So the chassis of the inverter is already very hot. We might do a little experiment on this one, so let's see. So as you can see, we're now using this workbench to do our little project for our grid tie inverter. So if you haven't seen the unboxing of this one, I just like to put a link somewhere up there for you to check the unboxing and how it is being assembled. Okay. So for today, we're going to do some of the bracket that will be used to the cooler that we'll be going to install for our grid tie inverter. Okay, for the cooler of the inverter, we're going to use this one. So this is already an unused air cooler. So this came quite popular in the other years, but I guess this will serve another purpose for the inverter. Okay. Okay, so this is the Arctic air. As you can see here. So this one is a 5 volts 5 volts DC with 1.5 to 2.1 amperes, but this one has a 12 volt motor inside. So meaning the USB port here as the power supply converts a DC-DC converter to 12 volts. Since we will not be using the 12 volt, let's try to disassemble this one to find out the wiring diagram for the 12 volt fan motor, as we will use this one for experimenting with the cooling system for our inverter, since the Arctic air has provision for putting in water inside the reservoir to cool down the filters, which are these ones, the filters. This is placed inside just like that. Okay, so as water drips down at the bottom, these filters here sips in the water and blowing it with the 12 volt fan here at the back. Okay, so let's try to locate the wiring diagram for the 12 volt fan and directly connect it to the thermal sensor that we have tested a while back. Okay. Okay, so we have already removed the power module. Let's just keep it as we might use it in another project. Okay. So let's cut this connector here and directly put it in the supply. Okay, so let's test the fan first. So we already have the power supply plugged into the socket. Okay, so it's still turning on. Hope you can see that. Turn it on again. Okay, so now let's connect this to the temperature module. Which is this one. So what this does is that when it reaches a certain temperature, shall we say at 40 degrees Celsius, it would turn on the fan, thus blowing cool air towards the inverter. Okay, so here we can set at what temperature we could use to trigger the 12-volt fan. Then we'll just have it wired here through these screw connectors and place it on the inverter. Okay. Okay, so after constructing the bracket for our Arctic air, that will be placed this way so that it would blow cool air towards the inverter. And we have also set up the temperature sensor here that we set at 35 degrees Celsius. So to set this one, just press on the set button and it will blink. So as soon as it will blink, you can now set the temperature. So for this one, it has a relay pin configuration here at the connectors, which is, hopefully you can see it. The leftmost part here is the K0, which is normally open or normally closed. I think let's just test it with a tester. So this one here is a K1. Okay. So as soon as the temperature is triggered, it will trigger the relay, thus turning on voltage in either of these terminals. Okay. So we also have here the voltmeter, so that we can check the voltage, and in this portion here of the connectors. Okay, so for the correct wiring diagram of this temperature activated relay switch is that K1, if you will be using only the 12 volt power supply, we will have to loop K1 to the positive 12 volts of the supply, while K0 will be going to the load. So here, as we set the temperature at 35 degrees, it should follow through with the relay in here, thus giving a 12 volt voltage to KO. So maybe later I'll just display the diagram for the 12 volt supply, including the load and other connection. Okay, so let's now trigger the relay. So outside temperature is 30.8 degrees. So by just holding on to this temperature probe, it increases the voltage and triggering it at around 35 degrees. Okay, so the relay is now triggered, so let's expect voltage from KO to ground should be a positive. Okay, so let me just hold this tight. And we have here the voltmeter. So here, KO with respect to ground should be positive, which is this one. So with this one, it should trigger our 12 volt load, which is the fan of the Arctic air. Okay, so it's now the same voltage as the input voltage. That's the temperature is being triggered. So when the temperature drops below 35, it will turn off the relay, thus turning off this voltage. Okay, so let's remove the sensor. Just leave it hang on and wait for the trigger to come on. Okay, so if the voltage, if the temperature drops 2 degrees below the set voltage, it will turn off the relay. Just wait for it. So it should turn off at 33 degrees. Okay, so the relay is now off. So voltage here with respect to ground should be 0 or at the negative. Okay. So let's try to hook up the Arctic air and test it again. Okay, so this is now how the Arctic air is being mounted to here. So we will now test it with the temperature sensor being activated. Okay, so let's hold on to the temperature sensor. So it was set at 35 degrees. Okay, so the relay is now triggered and the fan is already on. Okay, hope you can hear the sound of the fan. So in this way, the Arctic air blows directly a cool air towards the chassis of the grid tie inverter. And to make it more smart, we have hooked it up to the smart plug, which we can set on what time it will turn off and what time it will turn on. Okay, so it would be the best idea to trigger the temperature rather than triggering the current of the smart plug, because this is much reliable when it comes to reading the temperature. So hopefully we can test it out tomorrow as we continue to try to fix wiring connections for this one. Okay, so again, let's remove the temperature gauge and let's observe at what temperature will it turn off. Okay, so it would turn off at 33 degrees for this setting. So the relay is off and the fan is also turned off. Okay, nice. So hopefully we can test this setup tomorrow. Okay, as it is already past 5 o'clock and it's raining outside. Okay. Okay, good morning. Time check. It's now 10 o'clock in the morning, and this is now the final setup of this Arctic air cooler. So for the temperature, we set this one at 45 degrees Celsius for it to trigger the Arctic air cooling system. Okay. Since this one is a programmable temperature sensor, the return value for the relay to turn off is less 1 degree of the set value, which is 45. So it should cut off at 44 degrees. So by the way, you can manually set the return difference temperature of this one, since this is really a programmable temperature switch. So as the temperature goes down, it should cut off at 44 degrees. Just like that. So this is how the system is set up. And in here, for the water reservoir, I would suggest that you put in somewhat distilled water, not a water from the tap, as it contains chlorine and other minerals. So much better if you could put in rainwater for this one. So temporarily I just set it to half the container, for this is just a testing of the experiment. Okay. So hopefully with this type of setup, it will extend the lifespan of this grid tie inverter. So this is now the temperature relay sensor. the temperature probe here, and its power supply, which is also controlled by the smart plug right there. Okay. So that's it. So if this video is helpful for you, just give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. See you in the next one.